My daughter is a nurse at one of the local hospitals, and typically she works in surgery. That's her routine, and all surgeries right now have been shut down. So it's all hands on deck pretty much for COVID related cases. And it's a very stressful time. So thanks for recognizing all of those folks. I hear it firsthand often from her. My experience was very unexpected. At the time, 59 years old, very healthy, had never really been sick in my life, very fortunate, never been hospitalized, had never had any surgeries or anything like that. I think probably in my lifetime twice, maybe I've had the flu. That was probably the worst illness I'd ever had, out for a day or two, three, and then back to normal. So I was not fearful at all of COVID, although I respected all the aspects of risk, and certainly was fearful for others that I felt like were higher risk than myself. So in December, I did contract COVID. Initially, I had a little bit of fever. I ached. I lost my taste. I still really didn't believe that I had it, but I went and got tested, and sure enough, it was positive. And so they, followed instructions, stayed home, quarantined the whole 9 yards, thinking that I would have a mild case because I was in good health. And I did have what I would have considered a mild case for about the first week, 7 to 9 days. And then my case turned very, very dark and very drastic, and I declined. And so from that point forward, for about 10 days, I ran fever 24/7, about 102 to 105, which is a lot of fever for anybody. For an adult to somewhat senior adult, that is a whole lot of fever. Nothing would really control it. My breathing was very, very challenged. My oxygen rate was in the 78 to 85 range most of the time. And most interestingly for me, for that 10-day period, my heart rate was my normal 24-hour-a-day heart rate was 140 to 200. And so that was my existence for about 10 days. And about 4 of those days, I really thought I was not going to make it. My wife wanted me hospitalized. I have a very good friend who's my internal medicine physician, and he was adamant that I not treat this in the hospital. He said, we need to treat you at home. I'm going to treat you with all the same things you would have at the hospital, but I'm concerned of the isolation. And I think with your case, you may end up being intubated if you go to the hospital, and that will not end well for you. So I followed his advice, and I emerged from COVID and felt like I was on the other side or headed there, but had post-COVID, I had fatigue that was just beyond belief, and got to the point where I and my doc also believed that, this is not just recovering from COVID, you've got something going on. So we had a lot of tests run, and it turns out that COVID actually in some way changed the composition, changed some dynamics as it relates to my heart. And I ended up with a pretty bad case of AFib, which is an irregular heartbeat that causes your heart unexpectedly and randomly to race, because it ends up having electrical impulses that misguide your heart to have extra beats. Long story short is you treat that with meds, or you have a procedure called an ablation that often works to help. But bottom line is I emerged from COVID with a heart problem that needs to either be treated with meds or treated with surgery, and hopefully we can get beyond that. But there's implications long-term with what developed as a result of my having COVID. And not to say that I'm a very adamant person about freedoms of our country, the freedoms that are given to us and that we can't take for granted. I am not in favor of mandates. I'm not a person who believes that we should mandate by law that people are vaccinated. But I believe that when you look at the data, as you alluded to, and when you look at the situation of vulnerable folks, as the prior speaker with her mother, I just think that we owe it to the world. We owe it to the people around us, the people we love, the people we don't know who are vulnerable. The vaccine is proven, it works. The breakthrough cases, typically, if there are breakthrough cases, are very minimal compared to a full-blown COVID case on a non-vaccinated person. And I'm not a doctor, but I do read, and I just believe that in this situation, it's in your best interest and everyone's best interest to just bite the bullet, get the vaccine, and go on about your life. And I think that's the way we return to normalcy. And so I would ask anyone who's on the fence to reconsider. I was fortunate enough to get the vaccine in March, and I will get a booster. And, my biggest concern is having COVID again and what might happen in that situation. So personally, I was very much a believer that the vulnerable needed to be vaccinated, and that was kind of what my thought would be. And I didn't consider myself to be vulnerable, but I was proven very wrong. And so the other piece is just don't take it for granted that COVID's not going to do some really bad things to you. It's indiscriminate. It's completely indiscriminate, and it can happen to you. It can happen to a loved one, and don't let that be the case.